Welcome back to Mid-Cap Radar. Well, as promised, we are joined now by Nikhil Bhandari, Head Asian Equity Research and Co-Head of Asia Pacific Natural Resources and Clean Energy Research at Goldman Sachs. First up, thank you so much for coming to our studio, Nikhil. We have a lot to discuss. You've come out with a very interesting report as far as battery storage in India is concerned. First up, give us a sense of what is the need for battery storage vis-a-vis pump storage. We have round-the-clock options currently, but largely legacy-based thermal in nature. So how do you view and how do you view the economics of the entire battery storage ecosystem?
Sure. Thank you, Vivek. Thank you, Sonal, for having me back on the show. So when we look at India's power cost curve today, the cheapest option is still the new coal pithead or mine mouth-based plants. That is still the cheapest on the cost curve. The next close is pumped hydro-based round-the-clock renewable energy. Is the second best option we have from an economics perspective. And as we think about the battery-based, storage-based round-the-clock energy option, we believe it is still not competitive against pumped hydro-based round-the-clock renewable until the end of this decade. Now, this is despite we have come up with a new report talking about battery prices are falling rapidly. We are expecting about 50% decline in battery price between 2022 and 2026.
Wow.
But despite that, we have two challenges as we think about going all out on battery storage in India. Number one, there isn't much supply chain for the batteries in India currently, and in our view, the entry barrier is higher to localize the battery supply chain compared to, say, something like solar supply chain. And the entry barrier in our view is even further rising, given the leaders are propelling ahead with newer R&D-based newer products. And second challenge is the storage for battery is still appropriate for 2 to 4 hours backup perspective. So in order to make round-the-clock renewable with battery, you need to over-deploy more and more batteries to make round-the-clock renewable energy work, which makes the economics not competitive, even with falling battery prices against pumped hydro, until we go towards the end of this decade.
Okay, 50% fall is what you're expecting in till 2026, right? So that's a big fall. But in that case, if we talk about some of the supply chain issues versus, say, renewables or solar energy for that matter, where is, say, India lacking, or globally, how do we compare in the global setup?
Yeah, sure. So when you look at batteries globally, the cost curve is steepening for the cell manufacturers. That's the highest entry barrier in our view compared to manufacturing of components like cathodes and anodes, the two largest item, or compared to even just the packing of the cells. I think it's more simpler, but cell making or assembling these products into cell is the hardest step. To give you a bit of a context of the lay of the land, today, 5 companies globally cover nearly 80% of the global battery cell production. So it's very consolidated.
And I'm assuming most of them in China.
2 of them China, 2 of them Korea, 1 in Japan, right? Okay, so that they've been in the industry for over 20 years, manufacturing batteries. I think there are 2 or 3 issues there. Number one, it takes about 10 years from start of R&D till production, a start of production for battery. Number 2, skilled labor has been one of the challenge in the battery industry globally. And number 3, after getting the production as well, mass production is another skill set. Balancing 10, 15 different items going in a battery that gives you smaller pack with a lot of energy, good charging, discharging time, good density, safety, taking on everything in a smaller pack with a lot of energy has been hard at a mass production level. So that's the challenge that we are seeing in terms of the entry barrier in the battery space.
Nikhil, what we have to look at eventually is that discoms have to buy power from players, who are generating power using this particular technology. Now, going forward, do you expect, battery prices to fall enough for them to be competitive versus, thermal or even other forms of energy that we are seeing like pump storage or even solar or wind? So when do you see that happening, and do you think the investment is worth it?
So there are certain cases where battery storage-based renewables is becoming attractive. For example, when we think about the power shortage, one of the solutions has been use the previously depreciated stranded gas power plants and run them as peakers in the evening when the sun isn't shining. Against those, the battery-based renewable energy is already more attractive in India's context. However, against pumped hydro-based and against coal-based energy, which is round the clock, we do not believe the economics is attractive until the end of this decade.
Okay. Moving on, the other question which I want to ask you is recently, there was a draft notification as far as bringing in ALMM for solar cells and solar modules is concerned. How do you view this particular development for the solar manufacturing ecosystem in India?
Sure. So just let me add a little bit of context here. When we think about India's new energy setup, there are two unique things. I've mentioned this before, just want to bring it up again. One is India's got a unique power grid. It's fully connected, it's new. It helps to optimize the locations of the renewable. I can set up solar, wind, pumped hydro at different location and supply a combined power to another company sitting in the other location in the country.
Right.
The second unique aspect is the power cost curve is attractive for renewables in India because the power prices are higher compared to places like China. So even when I do solar generation cost is cheaper than China, power prices are higher than China. That take solar, make it round the clock. It's attractive and selling power at 6 to 8 rupees in India. However, the challenge is India doesn't have the supply chain. There is no self-sufficiency of the upstream product like solar. So we started first with module. It's a relatively easier step in the whole supply chain with least entry barrier. And with the help of custom duty, ALMM, PLI, India has gone ahead in becoming almost 40 gigawatt module capacity by last year from very, very small number before. Cell has a higher, if we go backward, we need cell, then wafer, then polysilicon.
Right.
In case of cell, the technological complexity is higher and the capital intensity is 3 times more than module. Okay. So it takes time. But India, 3 years ago, we were 1 gigawatt cell capacity in India. Now we are 6 gigawatts, so it's developing. So it makes sense to bring in ALMM and makes the price protection argument for the cell makers who are doing work to advance and achieve the self-sufficiency. So clearly, it seems government is focused on the self-sufficiency of the solar supply chain. We go module first, we're now going cell. Eventually, it may make case to do the same thing for wafer and polysilicon.
So do you think PLI, then we have ALMM, then customs duty for solar modules and cells as well that government spoke about earlier, that is something which is required for the industry to grow? Then if it doesn't happen, then good times won't last. Is this fair to say that?
I think initially, yes. I think this is an industry which is dominant out of China, controlling 90% plus of the supply chain, and they have a cost and scale advantage, which you can't replicate immediately in a very short span of time. So it makes sense to provide a duty-related price protection, capex subsidies, and these measures like ALMM to let the industry grow first, give it 2 to 3 years, and then achieve a scale that you can compete with the likes of China and other regions in manufacturing cost. As I said, India has a good setup on grid and downstream economics. We need to plug the self-sufficiency gap. So I think that it makes sense to give those kind of benefits for the medium term, but eventually that'll help to make a fully self-sufficient, round-the-clock renewable energy system for India, which will not compete just at a solar module or cell level. It'll compete more at what is my integrated round-the-clock renewable energy cost in the power cost curve versus the other country, and can I make more green molecules like hydrogen out of it? Yeah. Because the biggest cost of hydrogen is electricity.
Yes, electricity.
You need round-the-clock renewable electricity to make cheap hydrogen, or can I make cheaper green power that gives decarbonization as well as lower cost solution for a lot of enterprises in India? So I think that in an overall context, I think that is the ultimate business model, fully integrated end-to-end, and then eventually making green power or green molecules out of it.
Makes sense.
Nikhil, we are having this conversation in the context of equity markets actually celebrating a couple of recent listings. We had Premier Energies that listed at a significant premium to, what was the IPO price. We also have started seeing analysts now pricing in Tata Power solar module business. In this context, what kind of players do you think can benefit, across the solar value chain, as well as what kind of players rather? I know you can't take out individual names, but what kind of players, what kind of manufacturers will actually benefit?
Sure, as you mentioned. So I can't talk specific on the stocks here, but I can provide a bit of context here. The important thing is to look at what is the ultimate bottleneck here, because anybody on top of the bottleneck will end up eventually overpaying, and that's where investors needs to be eventually be mindful of. I think the initial setup in the medium term, the bottleneck has been the cells, and I think cells in 2 to 3 years time, the cell bottleneck will be over as well. The biggest bottleneck today is polysilicon outside of cell, right? We are importing currently 100% of pretty much most of the polysilicon required to make the modules. Polysilicon is very high energy intensive, needs to be on larger scale, and needs to be really pure to make ultimately good cell out of it. So I think those who are able to manage that bottleneck will be the more stronger medium-term winner who can do end-to-end, polysilicon to wafer, wafer to cell, cell to module. And again, this is again an industry which outside of India, for example, in China, is commoditizing.
Right.
So for a more longer-lasting, sustainable business model, we have to take that step forward, leverage on the grid to eventually make cheaper molecules, green molecules or green power out of it, right? So that's a more sustainable business model longer term. But as far as just going from module to cell, cell to wafer, these are still interesting cases to make return from a medium-term perspective.
Few steps ahead, few steps back, I think.
Exactly.
That is how players will have to go about it. Thank you so much, Nikhil, for joining in today. It was such an interesting discussion to understand the entire value chain and a lot more when it comes to the new energy space and the battery space in particular. With that, we'll do one thing. We'll slip into a short break. When we come back, we'll focus on Neogen Chemicals in our mid-cap spotlight segment and a lot more stock-specific action. Stay tuned for that.